Sayın Devlet Başkanı Vladimir Putin,
President Vladimir Putin,
Sayın
President
Emmanuel Macron,
Emmanuel Macron,
Şansölye
Chancellor
Sayın
Ms. Angela Merkel,
ve
and
Birleşmiş Milletler
the Special Envoy for Syria to the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Staffan de Mistura,
değerli basın mensupları,
distinguished members of the press, I would like to salute you all with my most heartfelt emotions and with respect. It gives us great pleasure to be able to host our valuable friends in Istanbul on the occasion of this very important meeting. And I also would like to thank President Macron, President Putin, and Chancellor Merkel for having positively responded to our invitation to come to Istanbul to have these important consultations on behalf of my personal self and on behalf of the entire nation. I hope and pray that our meeting, along with the decisions that we have made, will yield auspicious results for our Syrian brothers and sisters. Our fundamental priorities in this process is to ensure a full ceasefire in the field and render it prevalent in order to stop the bloodshed once and for all. And in the light of the legitimate demands of the Syrian people, a political solution should be produced so that the stability in the country can be restored. And we had extensively discussed as to how we could achieve that. And we have to underline this one fact. One of the fundamental reasons as to why the Syrian conflict became a global problem is that the international community inadequately owned up to this conflict for a really long time. And the problems introduced as a result of the Syrian crisis for a very long time had to be borne by the Syrian civilians and the neighboring countries. Many of the countries came to understand the severity of the situation only when the ramifications of the crisis reached their own borders. And I think this is the time to stop this indifference. Humanitarian, political, and diplomatic initiatives should be undertaken, or else the tragedy in Syria will unfold even worse. The main reason that brought us together in Istanbul is this. The cooperation within the framework of the Astana format had been exemplary for the international community. With the participation of France and Germany, we thought that the synergy created in Astana can be brought forward. And the more countries shall contribute to this very positive cooperation, and as many stakeholders as we can win over, I think we can expeditiously garner a very permanent solution to this conflict. Distinguished members of the press, we were very effective, efficient, and sincere when we were having our consultations. We have pledged our commitment to the territorial integrity and political unity of Syria, and we have once again confirmed our faith that the conflict cannot be settled through military methods solely. The permanent solution can only be produced with the observation of the United Nations and the negotiations which will be conducted under the leadership and the ownership of the Syrian people. On Idlib, we have signed a very valuable MOU with my distinguished friend Putin, and we had also confirmed the need to further advance that MOU. Respecting the MOU is crucial to preserve the existing ceasefire in Idlib and to stop any other humanitarian crises from breaking out. Hope started flourishing thanks to the silence that was created in Idlib, but it should be supported with political and concrete steps forward. Within this framework, we have launched an appeal to conclude the establishment of a constitutional committee as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, the terror threat resulting from the crisis in Syria was another important aspect that we've touched upon. And whether it be amongst the four countries, whether it be at the level of the international community, we have agreed to increase the solidarity and cooperation more. Turkey shares a borderline of 911 kilometers with Syria. That's why we are the foremost countries in the region that is heavily impacted because of the terrorist organizations harbored there. Until so far, many attacks were conducted by terrorist organizations such as Daesh and PYD, as a result of which hundreds of our citizens and law enforcement were wounded, and we have also seen martyrdom. In order to eliminate both of the terrorist organizations at the source, we had undertaken operations Euphrates Shield and the Olive Branch, as a result of which we had neutralized 7,500 Daesh and PYD terrorists, and we have secured an area of 4,000 square kilometers, liberating that area entirely of terrorist presence. And our country rendered cities such as Afrin, Jarablus, El Bab into safe places where peace, security flourishes. And furthermore, 260,000 Syrians returned to these lands, and we believe this number will increase in time. We will never allow terrorist organizations to gain strength neither inside Syria nor near our borders. And we will never accept new fait accompli in the field under the disguise of fighting terrorism. Just like in the western part of Euphrates, we will keep on eliminating the threats at the source which are imposed upon us at the eastern part of Euphrates. We have also discussed the humanitarian dimension of the Syrian conflict, and we have agreed that the humanitarian aid to Syrian people should be sustained. And we have also discussed the prospective return of the Syrian refugees to their countries. The return process should be handled in full cooperation with the United Nations in a safe and a secure fashion on the basis of volunteering in compliance with the international law and standards. Turkey is housing more than 3.5 million Syrian refugees, and undoubtedly we are the pioneering country in that regard. We have spent $33 billion for the Syrian refugees until so far, which is showcasing the sacrifices made by Turkey openly. And in the fair burden sharing principles, we expect the pledges of the European Union to be honored. And I want other countries to consider the forthcoming harsh winter conditions and increase their support to the Syrian people to cater to their needs. Dear friends, the bodies of children washed ashore are the most bitter symbols of the conflict and the pain that has been raging in Syria for the last 7.5 years. Primarily these countries here, all of the countries around the world should jointly fight to stop this tragedy once and for all. And at the summit meeting today, I know that we have conveyed very significant messages to our Syrian brothers and sisters and the international community. As the participants of the summit, we will increase our efforts in order to improve the situation in land and advance the political process. And I launch an appeal to all of the international community and the countries to support these efforts. As Turkey, we will sustain our efforts in order to contribute to the political solution, both in Astana platform and other different and more expensive platforms. This determination is very important, and our commitment is something of a close interest to Iran as well. And we are providing information to our Iranian brothers and sisters of the discussions and the talks we've had in order for this process to continue even more positively. And I think it's a necessity that we share with our Iranian friends. This determination is a necessity of our solidarity vis-à-vis the Syrian people, and it is a duty of us to the Syrian brothers and sisters. I conclude my remarks with these thoughts, and I would like to once again extend my gratitude to our valuable guests. I hope and pray that our summit meeting will flourish the hopes of solution in Syria once again. Thank you. I would like to thank you very much, my dear colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. Our discussions within the format of the Quadruple Summit were very positive, and I agree with the remarks of my colleagues, and I would like to congratulate the Turkish government and the Turkish state for making this occasion possible. We have discussed the Syrian question in every aspect, and we've tried to converge our stances vis-à-vis the Syrian conflict for a possible political solution to prevail. Russia, Germany, Turkey, and France will contribute tremendous efforts in order to help normalize the situation in Syria. We have agreed upon a final declaration within the framework of this summit today, and the relevant reforms should be undertaken in Syria. The conditions which would allow such initiatives to take place avail themselves, and within the framework of the discussions we've had until so far, and thanks to our joint efforts, vast lands of the Syrian territory were liberated from terrorist presence. Every party agrees upon the fact that a permanent peace can only be established through political methods and political principles. Resolution number 2554 is quite significant in that regard, and we highly value the principles of Syrian territorial integrity and political union. And in the meanwhile, the Syrian people should decide on their future upon their own free will. Just like this, the Astana Group efforts should be combined with the efforts of the small group meetings, so that the political transition process, the political solution process, can be accelerated. The Syrian authorities, who are constructive in this effort, should be incorporated within this process. We need to keep on focusing on the Geneva talks as well. These discussions will also focus on the state structure of Syria in the future as well. The Sochi Congress decisions should be taken into consideration as well all throughout this process. This process should be recognized as legitimate by all the segments of the Syrian people, so that this process can be effective and satisfactory. In the future, the Syrian people will be strengthened, the Syrian state will be strengthened, and the people will be united once again. We are expected to undertake a very extensive and an elaborate process, and all of the stakeholders will actively get involved in the political solution process, and the radical elements in Syria should be eliminated once and for all, and it's still a very important goal of ours. These terrorists can keep on employing their supporters in our own countries, and they can ablaze extremism in our own nations, and it is unacceptable. The Russian and Turkish MOU with regards to Idlib was very significant, and we had provided information to our partners here this afternoon about this MOU. The de-escalation zones have been introduced, and they are temporary precautions. In a very short period of time, the disarmed region and the de-escalation zones will keep on benefiting from the withdrawal of heavy artillery. Our Turkish partners are heavily invested in ensuring safety and stability there along with us. If any attacks shall emerge out of Idlib, Russia will, in a very determined fashion, help the Syrian government to eradicate this terror threat once and for all. We've also focused on the humanitarian aid issue and the return of the refugees back to Syria. Turkey is spending tremendous efforts on the refugees, and in order to improve the situation in Syria, we have to invest in social problems and help the economy to develop. That can only be achieved through joint efforts by the international community. Russia and France provided humanitarian aid to Eastern Ghouta a short while ago. And we have to expand the definition of what humanitarian aid stands for, and this is something we've agreed upon. Medical equipment, medical help, and the repairing and the maintenance of infrastructure and superstructure facilities should also be considered. We are planning to organize many summits of this nature in the future. It is a challenging issue, but challenges need to be handled for progress to be achieved. The Syrian government is ready to provide all forms of commitment to ensure the safety and the security of the people who will be going back to Syria. We've had bilateral talks with Chancellor Merkel, President Erdogan, and we will sit down together with President Macron as well. I would like to thank all of my colleagues for these very extensive and fruitful discussions, along with Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura. This was a very professional effort, and I'd like to thank everybody involved in the realization of this meeting, especially Staffan de Mistura was very productive all throughout this process. And in the meanwhile, I would like to congratulate the Republic Day of Turkey, which is the forthcoming celebration, which is all about the forthcoming celebrations marking the 95th anniversary of the founding of the Turkish Republic. I would like to congratulate the President and congratulate the entire Turkish nation. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président Erdogan, Monsieur le Président Putin.
Thank you very much, President Erdogan, President Putin, Chancellor Merkel, Special Envoy to the UN Secretary General Staffan de Mistura, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to thank President Erdogan for receiving us this afternoon here in Istanbul. We had deliberations on a very important issue. And Mr. President provided valuable information about the situation in Syria. I would like to convey my condolences to the people of the United States and the President of the United States due to the ferocious attack that took place in Pittsburgh in a synagogue, and we are by the side of the American nation. This summit that we have conducted here showed the necessity of converging many simultaneous processes which have already been underway, just like the Sochi and the Astana and the Geneva discussions and talks. Many months ago, we have decided to work together. About a year ago, I said that these processes should be associated with one another. They should be brought closer to one another in order to support the efforts of the United Nations. And in this summit, we have taken another step forward. Astana Group members the United States, the Sochi group, as well as the small group stakeholders will all be notified, and we are working hand in hand. This is an ongoing challenge, but political solution is our #1 priority in Syria. We are fighting terrorist organizations, and these terrorist organizations should be eliminated once and for all, as they have undertaken very ferocious attacks in our nations, in our countries. And while we are very committed to fighting terrorism at all costs, we will focus our tremendous efforts in a political solution to prevail. Which brings us to the concept of Idlib. We were very open, and in our deliberations, the Syrian regime's prospective military offensive on Idlib, along with the supporters of the regime, will never be acceptable. We were very open about this. And on humanitarian issues, we are talking about the regional stability, the stability of Turkey, and the entire globe. With new attacks, a new immigration influx will break out, which we have previously seen as a result of previous attacks. Russia and Turkey reached an MOU which should be followed and implemented from A to Z without any question. And this is something that we have once again pledged to and reflected our findings and our commitment within our final declaration. A sustainable and a permanent ceasefire should be protected in Idlib at all costs. This is something that we highly value. The Turkish president's suggestions on intelligence sharing and the expansion of humanitarian aid are things that we fully agree. And we believe our Russian friends' capability of exerting pressure on the regime. And I must say something else. Both in the region and anywhere else in the world, the use of chemical weapons is unacceptable, regardless of whom will be using them. The political process is something that we should never forget. There are 2 wars waged in Syria. Altogether, we are fighting terrorism and the terrorists in Syria against all terrorist organizations. And at the same time, there is the Syrian conflict, whereby the opposition is fighting the Syrian regime and vice versa, resulting in heavy influxes of refugees and migrants. This is not sustainable. This should be settled once and for all through political methods, so that all of the Syrian refugees can go back to their motherlands. We have to emerge and reconstruct a comprehensive and an inclusive Syria. The regime is acting in a conquering way, but it's not going to contribute to the stability and the security of Syria. 9 months after the Sochi summit, the Constitutional Committee had not yet been formed. And until the end of this year, we hope and pray that the lists will be approved for the prospective members of the Constitutional Committee so that they can have a summit. But it doesn't depend on the 4 of us. We have the will in place for that to be possible, and we want an inclusive political solution to emerge. The Syrian people will determine their faith. They have to have a say in the matter. Free and transparent elections should be conducted under the observations of the international community. We haven't seen any gestures in that regard or any favors in that regard which are concrete, but we are trying to mobilize the international community with endeavors just like this one. And until the end of this year, as all of the stakeholders, we will launch an appeal to have a summit of the Constitutional Committee to be held as soon as possible. Our will is strong. We owe this to the people of Syria, to those who have lost their lives, and to the ones fleeing the regime, seeking a new life somewhere else. And another issue, as a part of the final declaration, as President Putin touched upon, is the issue of humanitarian aid. With Russia and the United Nations, we have undertaken a joint effort in eastern Ghouta. It was an endeavor focusing on the NGO. These are the lands under the control of the regime. Every day, the NGOs in the region work closely with the people, and we need to keep on working with Russia and Turkey, along with Chancellor Merkel. The communities should benefit from expended humanitarian aid. The humanitarian aid convoys should encounter no hurdles, no interruptions whatsoever, and they should be dispatched to those in need without any delays. There are certain hurdles as we speak. Some humanitarian aid convoys are being stopped, which is unacceptable. Within the framework of the United Nations and within the mentality of solidarity and cooperation, we will keep on working together. Another issue out of the final declaration is about the return of the refugees to their motherlands. We highly appreciate the efforts of Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. For many years now, these countries have assumed a great responsibility, rose up to the occasion, and housed millions and millions of Syrian refugees fleeing the regime. But we have to speak clear today. The return of the refugees to their motherlands will never be possible unless a convincing political solution is achieved, because these people are fleeing the regime. We are seeing new influxes of immigrants and the refugees since the beginning of the year. If we can't replicate the efforts in Idlib elsewhere in Syria, we will keep on seeing new influxes of refugees and immigrants. That's why today, in the light of the principles identified by the UNHCR, safe, secure, dignified, and voluntary returns should be observed. I'm underlining once again, safe and voluntary returns depend on a convincing political solution, and the infrastructure such as water and electricity should be established for the people. This has been a very productive and a very efficient meeting. I'd like to thank the President once again, President Erdogan once again. Our discussions and our deliberations under this roof were very important, bringing forward new responsibilities for us to assume. We're talking about millions of refugees, but this is a matter, this is a conflict that is of close interest for the entire region. Everything we have discussed will render us responsible, and we have to be fully alert for the months and weeks to come. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chancellor, please.
Ja, sehr geehrte Kollegen, meine Damen und Herren, ich möchte mich...
My dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to thank you very much. I'm grateful for this invitation to Istanbul. It has truly been a very productive and a very efficient summit. We might have our differences, but we've reached an agreement and we have released a joint declaration pointing out to the fact that we have a strong and a common will. From Astana Group, from the small group meetings, we have representatives here gathering. And in terms of achieving an eventual solution, it will not be enough, but of course we have covered a great distance forward in doing so. The regime is waging a war to the opposition, a vast majority of their own people. unfortunately. And a military solution will not be enough. A political solution should be established once and for all within the principles of the United Nations and the relevant resolutions. We have seen human tragedy in Syria, and we have experienced disasters there. Millions and millions of Syrians are in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey, and in many European countries, including Germany. And in order for the humanitarian crises not to be repeated again, we will have to do everything within and beyond our capabilities. A ceasefire in Idlib, the signing of the MOU between Russia and Turkey, proved to be very effective. And in order for this ceasefire to be sustainable, we are ready to do everything we possibly can. In terms of disarmament of Idlib, a great success had been achieved already. The use of chemical weapons is undoubtedly unacceptable, and we are very decisive in that regard, something I must underline once again. And I would like to underline that the political solution is very critical. I would like to thank Special Envoy Mistura, because after the MOU in Sochi back in January, he spent tremendous efforts in order for a constitutional committee to be established. However, the constitutional committee had not gotten together yet. But once after the constitutional committee forms, the diaspora and all of the Syrians should get together in order to attend and cast their votes during a transparent and credible election. We will do everything we can so that the Constitutional Committee can gather until the end of this year. We feel this is very critical, because such a conflict, such a war cannot be settled through military means. We've also discussed the possible return of refugees to their homelands. Of course, the UNHCR will be involved. We need a very close cooperation with them, because the returning refugees should not be arrested or should not be a subject of surveillance. A humanitarian infrastructure should be, in a very dignified fashion, established once and for all. There should be calm there. We need a political solution for people to be able to go back to their motherland. Syria should once again become a motherland for all the Syrians, a safe and a secure motherland. We have a common will, as the solution asks for urgency. That's why this is the night time for a political solution to be created. Within the framework of a peaceful settlement without any new humanitarian crisis breaking out should be our main objective. Thank you very much. Our statements have come to an end, but we can receive one question. And let's begin with Le Monde. Hello, my name is Marie Jacot from Le Monde newspaper. My question is as the following. Mr. de Mistura paid a visit to Damascus, and the foreign minister's words were very, very harsh. What kind of a maneuver do we have here? What kind of flexibility will President Putin have in this regard? How are you going to convince Bashar Assad for the necessity of establishing a constitutional committee, especially until the end of this year? If I were to list you the methods, it wouldn't be very constructive. In order for the advancement of these efforts, we need to be calm, we need to be respectful. We have to respect the legitimate government of Syria. Everyone's referring to Syrian regime, but according to the resolution of the United Nations Security Council, it is referred to as the Syrian Arab Republic government. By respecting the Syrian legitimate government and with the intention of having positive contacts with the opposition, as we've always been inviting them to have a positive contact with us, and by basing our efforts on the final declaration of today, until the end of this year, when the conditions mature, when the circumstances avail themselves, the Constitutional Committee will be established and will become operational. In the Syrian National Dialogue Congress, it was decided that a Constitutional Committee should be formed. And after that, we've had agreements with Bashar Assad and the opposition representatives. Two sections were formed on behalf of the regime and on behalf of the opposition. We have built two lists of names, and we are building a third list incorporating the NGOs as well. These are very challenging efforts, as all of the stakeholders are willing to incorporate their trusted representatives. But if no trust will be built vis-à-vis this Constitutional Committee, no benefit can ever be derived. Both in Syria and in Iran, we will keep on talking with our stakeholders, and we need to have our consultations. Iran is one of the guarantors of the peace process, and they are one of the guarantors of the ceasefire to be sustained.
Michael Fischer, Deutsche Presseagentur. Herr Präsident Erdogan, haben Sie am Rande dieses Gipfels auch über die Ermittlungen im Fall des getöteten
President Erdogan,
Jamal Khashoggi informiert und wie reagieren Sie auf die Weigerung Saudi-Arabiens?
I would like to ask you a question with regards to Jamal Khashoggi's murder. Have you given any information to Saudi authorities on Khashoggi's killing? And there were talks about, and there was an appeal about the extradition of the responsibles to Turkey so that they could be tried in here. A German citizen was arrested in Istanbul, and I would like to ask you if you have asked a question to Erdogan about the whereabouts of the individual which was arrested. About the late Jamal Khashoggi, in our bilateral discussions we had discussed these issues, and I have conveyed to them the information that I had. And there had been certain exchanges between our intelligence agencies about this matter, and we started digging upon the details with the deliberations we've had this afternoon. I need to be very clear here once again, and I need to be very frank. Having the international media here obliges me to give the following answer. First and foremost, there are 18 individuals who were arrested in Saudi Arabia. These 18 individuals are the ones, obviously, that have traveled to Turkey. 15 plus 3 equals to 18. This is the distribution.
Kimler gönderdi?
These individuals, who were they sent by to Turkey? And the answer to this question should be provided by the Saudi authorities. And the other question,
Açıklama Suudi Arabistan
we've heard another statement
yetkili mercilerinden
from the higher authorities of Saudi Arabia,
Türkiye'deki yerli işbirlikçilere
stating the fact that the body of Khashoggi was handed over to their local accomplices in Istanbul, or they had some sort of a cooperation here with a local accomplice. So, who is this local accomplice?
bu açıklamayı yapan
And I think this is a question that we need to address to the people who came up with their statements in the first place. They have to identify and name this so-called local accomplice. They say that these individuals will be charged and will be prosecuted and they will be
Suudi Arabistan
sentenced. But this crime took place in Istanbul. If Saudi Arabians, they are not going to do this, if that's not going to take place, the trial can be handled by the Turkish judiciary here in Istanbul. And through our Ministry of Justice, we have launched an appeal in a written form through official channels that Turkey was ready to make these individuals stand trial here in Turkey. We will be expecting an answer for this question.
başsavcısının
And on the other hand, the Saudi Arabian chief public prosecutor will be sent
İstanbul başsavcımızla
here. And he will get together with the chief public prosecutor of Istanbul. The delegations will have exchanges,
doğrusu
and I'm giving great significance to the outcome of these deliberations tomorrow.
teşkilatımız
Our
bunun yanında
police force,
istihbarat teşkilatımız
our intelligence,
yargı
and
teşkilatımız
our judiciary
yoğun bir çalışma içerisinde
are heavily invested in this
ve bu çalışmalar bitmemiştir. Hala bu
matter.
aynı hassasiyet
They
içerisinde
are not concluded yet, and they are still as sensitive as they have always been
İstanbul'daki Alman
about this incident.
olarak da
And lastly, about the German citizen in Istanbul,
cezasını vermiştir.
the court reached a verdict and sentenced this person. Appeal is still possible vis-a-vis this sentence, and they can apply to the Court of Appeals, and we will all have to respect the final verdict of the Turkish judiciary following the appeal.
Auch von meiner Seite, ja, wir haben natürlich, so wie der Präsident Erdogan es eben gesagt hat, über die Frage
As President Erdogan said a couple of minutes ago,
weiteren Austausch von Informationen vereinbart. Wir haben auch über die Verurteilung
of course we had discussed the killing of Jamal Khashoggi,
gesagt, dass wir eine gute konsularische
and we've also discussed the
Verurteilten haben möchten und
arrest of a German citizen.
Handlung setzen.
We told President Erdogan that he needs to benefit from fair treatment and he needs to be able to have access to a good consulate service.
Ich habe noch einmal dargestellt, dass wir in Deutschland ja seit der Koalition
And when we were together with President Macron, we also discussed the ferocious killing of Jamal Khashoggi as well. We also discussed the Yemeni war, and we've decided that we were leading a very determined policy in ensuring that no arms export to Saudi Arabia will be possible. And I have clearly stated that our determination will be sustained so that no arms will be exported to Saudi Arabia. The perpetrators will have to be identified. And once after they are identified, as the EU, on the basis of common values, we will do everything that is necessary. And this is something that I would provide a pledge to. Yes, thank you very much. I need to clearly state that we discussed these issues with Chancellor Merkel. This very horrific murder was discussed at every possible length. We condemn this incident and all that's been, our intelligence sharing continues. Very close and very strong cooperation took place in the sharing of the evidence recovered, and the Turkish cooperation was very significant as well. There are some phenomena out there, but some dark spots will have to be illuminated and the responsible perpetrators will have to be identified. Consistent information should be provided at all costs. By consistency, I mean the incident will have to be associated with the relevant perpetrators. And the possible sanctions which will be imposed should be imposed upon the level of the EU, and they need to be very comprehensive. They will not be limited down to certain sectors. And Europe will work together in such circumstances. Good evening. I am representing Rezhubunsi News Agency. My question will go out to all of the leaders. What is the future structure of Syria will be according to your deliberations, and what will Assad's position be? And I will ask a question about Idlib. The MOU on Idlib, are you happy with its implementation? Do you think there might be an issue where military intervention might be required? And my final question will be for President Erdogan. At the beginning of your deliberations, the quadruple format needs to be expanded. Who do you think can be incorporated further? For example, the United States is a significant player in the field, and what other countries can be incorporated? Are you going to keep on having frequent discussions within the format of this meeting? I will answer first, if you will allow me. Our principled stance is as the following. The Syrian people will determine their own fate, and they will choose their own leaders. In order for that to be possible, a political process should be initiated, a constitutional committee should be formed and become operational. This is what we've discussed today. We haven't discussed any names, and it wouldn't be very constructive today. If we want to be successful, discussing future names would be not constructive. I've already spoken much about Idlib. Russia reserves the right to support the Syrian government against all provocations. A short period of time, I told my colleagues around Idlib, Aleppo was hit with mortars, and our aerial surveillance systems spotted 50 predators, 50 drones around the airspace of Memi Air Base, and 50 drones were shut down. Everything we are doing in the field has to do with the objectives that we are sharing with you, that we want to achieve. We want to protect Idlib and the entire Syrian territory from terrorist presence and all forms of extremists. Our efforts have not been concluded yet, but we will keep on cooperating with Turkey. What will the situation of Assad be? Let me answer that question first. Before anything else, the will does not depend on individuals. The will is the will of the people of Syria, which should speak. The people will speak both inside Syria and outside Syria and designate their future leaders. In my point of view, in our point of view, Assad is a person who has attacked his own people, killing around 1 million civilians. He's not a respectable individual in our point of view, and he's not a reputable individual in our point of view. the situation is out there for everybody to observe as the massacres are still sustained in Syria. We hope and pray that this process will be concluded peacefully as soon as possible so that people in Syria can decide how they will continue with their lives. Right now, 3.5 million people live in Idlib. Where were these people coming from? They came from Aleppo. They were fleeing barrel bombs and seeking refuge in Idlib. But unfortunately, in the last few months, their right to survive in Idlib were taken away from them. But where were they going to flee next? There were no place else other than Turkey. We already have 3.5 million refugees. Another influx of 3.5 million refugees would be impossible to bear. I don't know how many of them would escape and come to Turkey, but thanks to our deliberations and discussions with President Putin, thanks to the concrete steps taken forward in the field, we have agreed on an MOU consisting of 10 provisions, 10 articles. We've managed to initiate a new process. A sustainable and a permanent ceasefire, hopefully, has been restored. The continuation of such a ceasefire will be crucial for the people living there. They were relieved, but when you look at the buildings destroyed and when you look at the bodies of the people under the rubbles, can you imagine what has been going on there? As political figures, as the presidents and as the heads of states, we are in a position to wonder as to how we will be able to pay the price of these horrible incidents. We are doing everything we can in order to improve the situation of the Syrian refugees. We are supporting them openly, and we need to provide humanitarian support at all costs. That's our duty. We also discussed what else could be done in infrastructure, superstructure, in education, in healthcare. We've discussed all of these issues and hoping that we will progress. And finally, your question about the prospective expansion of this quadruple summit, it's something that we will decide jointly. This is not a fixed format. If we decide accordingly, just like in Astana, this group might expand. I would like to contribute the following remark. Our final declaration significantly and clearly points out to the fact that the Syrian people, the entirety of the Syrian nation, will participate in free and transparent elections under the observation of the United Nations and the international community. The diaspora and the ones left behind will speak up, and they will determine their own future and cast their votes accordingly. Syrian regime harmed many lives, killed many people. We are talking about a political solution, but it's not going to be an easy task. It will need support from the international community. And about Idlib, with the introduction of the MOU in September, I'm very happy to see the progress in the field. I hope that this process will be sustained as it is. We undoubtedly, unquestionably support this process. We don't want millions and millions of people to be threatened again and to be endangered again. Of course, it's going to be difficult, but last few weeks proved that success is out there and some results can be cultivated. Thank you very much. I was very clear in my opening remarks. I fully agree with President Erdogan's remarks. It's not up to us to decide on the future structure of the Syrian state, but it will be upon the Syrian people to decide on their future, and we are responsible to help to ensure the circumstances to prevail which will allow them to exercise their free will and determine their fate. There are certain concrete decisions made in Sochi, including the establishment of a constitutional committee, because the constitutional committee will be the first step forward. We have a sovereign government and we have to respect that government, but international community should exert pressure upon the regime. What did we say in Sochi? The international community will have a say in this matter as well. In the light of the provisions of the Sochi MOU, the Idlib MOU, the international community will have certain things to say. This is how we will move about in the next few weeks and months. We will respect the will of the Syrian people, and the Syrian regime is yet again to be respected, but we need to say that the Syrian regime, the current regime, is not representing the entirety of the nation any longer. Many people had to flee to Turkey, to Lebanon, to Jordan, to France and Germany. We have to lay the foundation upon which people can stand tall and determine their fate. We have one demand in ensuring that, and that is the free expression of the will of the people in Syria. The last question from the Turkish media. About Idlib and about the disarmed zones, we know that extensive efforts have been spent. There were certain provisions about the possibility of using drones for surveillance purposes, or the Russian and the Turkish troops acting together in the field. When do you think that will be possible? And for the Constitutional Committee, we've always been discussing the names, the lists and the modalities, and nothing else happened. Stefan de Mistura delivered a presentation to you on, I believe, this afternoon. And what made you put a calendar to the establishment of a committee? When will we see this quadruple once again? A date had not been identified as to when you will unite back together. These are the questions that I had. Thank you. In this format, we haven't set a new date, but anything could be possible. The number of the stakeholders can be increased because it will be beneficial for the settlement of the conflict in Syria. It was suggested by the French president, the Astana group and the small group efforts can be joined together with the efforts of this quadruple summit. President Erdogan supported us in this regard, and I think he paved the way to the discussions here, which were very beneficial. You said 9 months since the Sochi MOU was produced, and no results were ever garnered. But I'd like to remind you that the parties never gathered for an entire year before Sochi. Our efforts were going to be derailed. It was a very challenging time. But then, of course, we started the Astana format with the Turkish president along with the Iranian president, and this process was initiated. We started receiving proposals, and it wasn't a very easy story. The National Syrian Dialogue Congress wasn't very easy to undertake in Sochi. Yes, of course, we cannot move as expeditiously as we would wish, but we have reached some accomplishments. We've convinced the Syrian regime to submit their own lists, and my counterpart, the distinguished Turkish president, served his part. An opposition list emerged, and now we are drafting a third list of names. This is a very dire process because a committee should be consisting of stakeholders trusted by everybody. That's the only way to success. And I would like to thank you.
Evet, ben de çok teşekkür ediyorum.
About Idlib,
Tabii
the 10 provision MOU is an answer to many questions. We can find everything we're looking for inside that document. We have 12 observation posts along with the Russian Federation, where we work in full solidarity. And other than these posts, 10 observation posts are being controlled by the Russian Federation. They're ensuring the security of the region. But more than anything else, the striking detail about the Idlib MOU is about the eradication of radical extreme elements by Turkey, and similarly, the regime will not be able to impose any threat whatsoever upon the region as ensured by the Russian Federation. The heavy weapons will be entirely withdrawn from Idlib, and they will no longer disturb the settlers of Idlib.
rahatsız etmemesinin sağlanması. Bunun yanında yine aynı şekilde
In the face of the attacks which might take place, we will respond in full solidarity and in full cooperation as Russia and Turkey. Our subunits are continuously working, whether it be defense, whether it be intelligence, whether it be anything else. They're in full cooperation and solidarity. We want to make sure that the civilians live in peace. And about 60,000 Syrians returned to Idlib, which proves that this process has been very successful. And I would like to thank President Putin for his contributions and everybody else involved in the realization of this MOU process. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.